The thought hit me as I watched Rhea Morrick, my girlfriend of 3 years, lean against the rooftop bar's railing, her wine glass catching the city lights. She was telling another story about my inadequacies to her circle of lifestyle columnist friends, and the laughter that followed cut through the evening air like a saw blade through cheap plywood. "Grant can't even plan a weekend, let alone build anything real," she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. The group erupted in giggles, and I felt something fundamental shift inside my chest. Not break, shift, like a beam settling under too much weight. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Grant Solen, 39 years old, construction estimator for Morrison & Associates. I calculate load-bearing requirements, foundation specs, and material costs for buildings that'll stand longer than most marriages. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could engineer a 50-story tower, but couldn't seem to construct a relationship that lasted more than a few years without major structural damage. He spent 2 hours yesterday trying to figure out which Netflix show to watch, Rhea continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound both exasperated and superior. 2 hours, I could write 3 articles in that time. Her friend Brett, a gossipy features writer with perfectly styled hair and an opinion about everything, leaned in closer. "Honey, you deserve someone with actual ambition, someone who builds empires, not just—" "What does he build again?" "Foundations," Rhea said, like it was a dirty word. "He measures concrete and dirt all day." I finished my beer, a local IPA that cost $12 because this was the kind of rooftop bar where everything was overpriced and under-seasoned, and set the empty bottle on the nearest table. The conversation continued without anyone noticing I'd stopped participating about 10 minutes ago. "The thing is," Rhea was saying, "I need someone who understands vision. Big picture thinking. Grant's idea of planning ahead is checking the weather forecast." More laughter. I pulled out my wallet, left a 20 on the table to cover my drinks, and headed for the exit. Nobody called after me. Nobody asked where I was going. I might as well have been invisible, which, come to think of it, pretty much summed up my role in Rhea's life these days. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. 43 floors of polished steel and awkward silence, just me and my reflection looking back with the expression of a man who'd finally heard enough. The lobby was all marble and glass, the kind of place designed to make you feel important if you belonged there, or small if you didn't. I definitely felt small. Outside, the October air carried the smell of car exhaust and distant rain. The city never slept, but it definitely had moods, and tonight felt restless. I walked the 6 blocks to my truck, a 10-year-old Ford F-150 with paint chips and honest dents earned from actual work, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. My phone buzzed, a text from Rhea. "Where did you go? We're moving to the wine bar down the street." I stared at the message for a full minute, then deleted it without responding. Instead, I started the truck and drove home to our shared apartment in Riverside Heights, a decent neighborhood where young professionals lived before they either made it big or settled for good enough. The apartment was quiet, decorated mostly with Rhea's taste. Modern furniture that looked expensive but felt uncomfortable, abstract art that meant nothing to me, and exactly zero evidence that a construction worker lived there. My tools stayed in the truck. My work boots lived in the hallway closet. My presence had been systematically minimized over the past year, I realized, like I was a temporary fixture waiting to be replaced with something more stylish. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and settled onto the couch that cost more than my monthly truck payment. The TV remote was missing. Rhea had a habit of hiding it in random places when she was annoyed about something, so I just sat there in the dark, thinking about foundations. A good foundation is invisible. Nobody notices it unless it fails. It supports everything above it without getting credit, takes all the weight without complaint, and when it finally gives way, everybody acts surprised, even though the warning signs were there for months. My phone rang around midnight. Rhea's name lit up the screen, and I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Grant, where are you?" Her voice was slurred, emotional. "I've been calling and texting. Brett said you just disappeared." "I'm home." "Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? I looked like an idiot." I almost laughed. "You looked like an idiot because I left?" "Don't be like that. You know what I mean?" "Actually, I don't. Explain it to me." There was a long pause, the kind that happens when someone realizes they've walked into a conversation they're not prepared for. "Look, I had a few drinks, okay? If I said something that hurt your feelings, Grant, don't make this bigger than it is. You're being sensitive." Sensitive. That was her favorite word for whenever I reacted to something she'd said or done. Not hurt, not justified, not reasonable. sensitive, like having feelings was a character flaw. I'm tired, Rhea. We'll talk tomorrow. Wait, don't hang up. I'm getting an Uber home. Can you wait up for me? I looked around the apartment that didn't feel like mine, at the life I'd somehow built that didn't seem to include me as anything more than a supporting character. Sure, I said, and meant it. We did need to talk. But when she finally stumbled through the door at 1:30 in the morning, makeup smeared and wine-stained, she went straight to bed without saying another word. I stayed on the couch until sunrise, thinking about load-bearing walls and structural integrity, and what happens when the foundation finally decides it's done holding everything up. The next morning, Rhea emerged from the bedroom wearing my old Morrison & Associates t-shirt and an expression that suggested she remembered exactly nothing from our phone conversation. She moved around the kitchen like she was performing a dance she'd rehearsed. Coffee, toast, phone check, repeat. Morning, babe, she said without looking up from her screen. I'm meeting my editor at 10 to discuss the holiday lifestyle series. Apparently there's big advertiser interest. I sat at the kitchen table with my own coffee, watching her perform her morning routine. 3 years of this, and I'd never noticed how carefully choreographed it all was. Every movement designed to look natural while avoiding actual conversation. How was the rest of your night? I asked. Fine. Good. Brett introduced me to some people from the Arts Council, potential networking opportunities. She finally glanced up. You missed some interesting conversations. I'm sure I did. She must have heard something in my tone because she paused, coffee mug halfway to her lips. Are you okay? You seem off. Just thinking about work stuff. The Morrison project? I nodded, though that wasn't what I was thinking about at all. I was thinking about the way she'd described my job last night, like I spent my days playing in sandbox instead of calculating the mathematical precision required to keep buildings from falling down. I was thinking about how easily she'd dismissed everything I did, everything I was, for the entertainment of people who wouldn't remember my name if their lives depended on it. Well, don't let it stress you out too much, she said, already back to her phone. It's just concrete and stuff, right? Just concrete and stuff? Right. I finished my coffee and headed to work, leaving her scrolling through Instagram comments on her latest article about finding your authentic self in an inauthentic world. The irony was thick enough to pour. Morrison & Associates occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, where the coffee was strong, the language was colorful, and nobody pretended to be anything other than what they were. My desk sat near the window overlooking the construction yard, where real work happened by real people who understood that buildings didn't construct themselves through positive thinking and networking events. You look like hell, said Maggie Chen, my closest friend at work and the best project coordinator in the city. She dropped into the chair beside my desk with her usual grace, which is to say she collapsed like a controlled demolition. Thanks. You really know how to make a guy feel special. I'm serious. What's wrong? And don't say nothing, because I've seen you handle foundation failures with less stress than whatever's eating at you right now. I told her about the rooftop bar, about Rhea's performance, about the phone call that went nowhere. Maggie listened without interrupting, which was one of her many talents. She could hear the whole story before offering advice, unlike most people who started solving your problems before you finished explaining them. So, what are you going to do? She asked when I finished. I don't know yet. That's not true. You always know. You're just deciding whether to do it. She was right, of course. I'd been calculating possibilities since last night, running scenarios like I was estimating a complex build. The difference was, this time I wasn't trying to create something. I was trying to figure out what happened when you removed the supporting structure from someone else's carefully constructed life. My phone buzzed with a text from Rhea. Forgot to mention, having drinks with the team tonight to celebrate the holiday series approval. Don't wait up. No question mark. No invitation. Just information delivered like a weather report. I showed the message to Maggie, who read it twice before handing the phone back. Grant, she said carefully, when's the last time she included you in anything work-related? She says I wouldn't fit in with her crowd. And when's the last time you two did something together? Just you two? I thought about it. Really thought about it. I honestly can't remember. That's not a relationship, Grant. That's a roommate situation with occasional benefits. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. Grant, this is Mark Pulaski from the Tribune. I'm Rhea's editor. Mark Pumper. Pulaski, though nobody called him that to his face anymore. 40-something, balding, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from being promoted just high enough to be dangerous, but not high enough to be secure. Rhea had mentioned him frequently over the past few months, always in the context of great opportunities and career advancement. What can I do for you, Mark? I wanted to personally thank you for supporting Rhea's career. The Holiday Lifestyle series is going to be huge for us, and I know your encouragement means everything to her. My encouragement, right? She's very talented. She is very talented and ambitious. I admire that in a woman, don't you? There was something in his tone, something that made the conversation feel less like professional courtesy and more like a dog marking territory. Sure. Well, I won't keep you. I know you construction guys start early. Just wanted to touch base, man to man. The line went silent, and I stared at my phone like it might explain what had just happened. Who was that? Maggie asked. Rhea's editor, calling to thank me for supporting her career. That's weird. Yeah, it was. But it was more than weird. It was territorial. It was the kind of call you make when you want to establish your presence in someone else's space, like leaving your scent on something you consider yours. I spent the rest of the day running calculations for the Morrison high-rise project, but my mind kept drifting to other calculations. Lease agreements, shared credit cards, joint accounts, the financial architecture of a 3-year relationship that might be more fragile than either of us had realized. That evening, I drove past the Tribune building downtown. Rhea's car was in the parking garage, along with a silver BMW that I was willing to bet belonged to Mark Pumper Pulaski. They were probably upstairs right now, celebrating her success, discussing her bright future, maybe sharing a drink to toast their professional partnership. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, engine running, heat on, watching the windows of the Tribune building and thinking about foundations again. About what happens when you discover the ground you built on isn't as solid as you thought. About whether it's better to shore up the existing structure or tear it down and start over with better materials. My phone buzzed with another text from Rhea. Celebration going late. Crashing at Brett's tonight. See you tomorrow. Brett lived across town, in the opposite direction from the Tribune building. But people lied about geography all the time, especially when the truth was inconvenient. I drove home to our apartment and spent the evening doing something I'd never done before. I looked at our life together with the cold, analytical eye I usually reserved for construction projects. What I found wasn't pretty. Joint lease, Rhea's name first, her credit score carrying most of the weight, shared accounts, my money, her spending, very little discussion about either. Social life, her friends, her events, her career taking precedence over everything else. Physical space, my presence minimized, my belongings hidden, my existence carefully edited to fit her aesthetic. It was a relationship built on an unstable foundation, and I'd been too busy trying to make it work to notice that I was the only one doing the structural engineering. But I was good at my job. And if there was one thing I understood, it was how to systematically dismantle something that was no longer structurally sound. Rhea came home the next afternoon wearing yesterday's clothes and a story about falling asleep on Brett's couch after too many celebration drinks. She told it while making coffee, her back to me, her voice carrying the practiced casualness of someone who'd rehearsed the details. You should have come, she said, finally turning around. Everyone was asking about you. Were they? Of course. They wanted to meet the famous Grant I'm always talking about. Famous Grant. I wondered which version of me she'd been sharing with her colleagues. Probably not the one who couldn't plan a weekend or build anything real. Maybe next time, I said. Definitely. Mark specifically said he wants to get to know you better. He thinks it's important for partners to understand each other's work. Partners. Interesting word choice. I spent the morning at the Morrison site reviewing foundation specs with the crew. There's something honest about construction work that I'd always appreciated. You can't fake structural integrity. You can't charm your way around physics. Either the math works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, everybody finds out eventually. Boss, called Tommy Ricci, one of our senior foremen. We've got a problem with the south corner. Come take a look. I followed him to where the crew had been pouring concrete the day before. What should have been a smooth, level surface was cracked and uneven, like someone had mixed the batch wrong or poured it too fast. Who did this section? I asked. New guy. Said he had experience, but Tommy shrugged. Experience lying doesn't count for much when the concrete sets. We spent 2 hours breaking up the bad pour and preparing to start over. It was expensive, time-consuming, and completely avoidable if someone had just followed the specifications instead of improvising. The thing about foundations, I told the crew as we worked, is that shortcuts always show up later. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually. And when they do, you can't just paint over the problem and hope nobody notices. Tommy nodded. Truth. Better to do it right the first time than explain why it fell down later. I was thinking about more than concrete when I said it. but construction metaphors had a way of applying to everything else in life, relationships included. That evening, Rhea announced another work event. "Team dinner," she said, already getting dressed. "New advertiser wants to meet the whole lifestyle staff." "Which restaurant?" "That new place on 5th Street. Antonio's? Very exclusive." Antonio's was 15 minutes from downtown, in the opposite direction from where any Tribune advertiser would logically want to meet. But geography had become flexible in Rhea's explanations lately. "Have fun," I said. "You could come if you want, though it might be boring for you, lots of industry talk." It was the kind of invitation designed to be declined, offered with just enough politeness to avoid seeming rude while making it clear that my presence wasn't actually desired. "I'll pass. Got some project specs to review." "Of course you do." She kissed my cheek absently, already mentally somewhere else. "Don't wait up." After she left, I did something that 3 months ago would have seemed unthinkable. I drove to Antonio's. The restaurant was small, intimate, with dim lighting and tables arranged for private conversation. I parked across the street and waited. If Rhea was really here for a team dinner, I'd see her colleagues arriving. If she wasn't, 20 minutes later, a silver BMW pulled into the valet area. Mark Pulaski got out, handed his keys to the attendant, and walked inside like he owned the place. He was alone. 5 minutes after that, Rhea's car arrived. She emerged wearing the black dress she'd bought for our anniversary dinner 6 months ago, the one she'd said was too special for just any occasion. Apparently this qualified as special enough. I watched through the restaurant's front window as they were seated at a corner table, close together, intimate. This wasn't a business dinner. This was a date. A carefully orchestrated, deliberately hidden date. I sat in my truck for another hour, watching them laugh and lean into each other's conversation, watching Rhea touch his arm in a way she hadn't touched mine in months. When they finally left together, getting into his BMW and driving toward the downtown hotel district, I already knew where they were going. But knowing and having proof were different things. I followed at a distance, staying back far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to confirm what I already suspected. The BMW pulled into the Marriott parking garage. They walked into the hotel lobby together, his hand on the small of her back, her body language speaking a language I recognized from when she used to speak it with me. I drove home and spent the rest of the evening doing research, not the kind that required private investigators or illegal surveillance, just the kind that involved paying attention to details I'd been ignoring for months. Rhea's phone bill, which I had access to as the primary account holder. Hundreds of texts to Mark's number, often late at night, frequently during hours when she'd told me she was working on articles or attending work events. Her credit card statements, joint account, my name on the bills, charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never stayed at, stores that sold things she'd never brought home. Her laptop, which she'd left open on the kitchen table, logged into her email account. I didn't read her private messages, but I didn't have to. The subject lines were enough. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we get away again?" By midnight, I had a complete picture of a relationship that had been going on for at least 3 months, probably longer. A relationship that had been funded in part by my money and facilitated by lies I'd been too trusting to question. But I wasn't angry. Anger was hot, impulsive, destructive. What I felt was cold, analytical, methodical. I felt like an engineer who'd just discovered that the building he'd been maintaining was structurally unsound and needed to be systematically demolished before it collapsed and hurt someone. The someone being me. I opened my laptop and started making lists. Joint accounts to be closed, shared obligations to be terminated, lease agreements to be reviewed. I approached it like any other project. Identify the scope, calculate the resources, plan the timeline, execute the work. The difference was, this time I wasn't building anything. I was taking apart something that had been built on lies and seeing what was left when the facade was removed. Rhea came home at 6 in the morning, moving quietly through the apartment like she was trying not to wake me. I heard her shower, heard her get ready for work, heard her leave again without saying goodbye. I waited until 9, then made my first call. "Morrison and Associates, this is Maggie." "It's Grant. I need to take a personal day, maybe 2. "Everything okay?" "It will be." There was a pause. Maggie had known me long enough to read the spaces between words. "What do you need?" "Nothing dramatic. Just some administrative work that can't wait." "Grant? Yeah?" "Whatever you're planning, make sure it's something you can live with afterward." "I will." I hung up and made my second call to the leasing office of our apartment complex, then to the bank, then to the credit card company, then to a storage facility across town. By noon, I'd set in motion a series of events that would systematically dismantle the financial and logistical infrastructure of a relationship that had been systematically betraying me for months. It felt good to be building something again, even if what I was building was an exit strategy. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and careful planning. I moved through my daily routine with Rhea like an actor playing a role, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while systematically dismantling our shared life behind the scenes. She didn't notice. She was too busy with her work projects and team meetings to pay attention to administrative details like lease renewals and account statements, which made everything easier. I found a new apartment in Millfield, a blue-collar neighborhood where construction workers were welcome and nobody cared if your truck had honest dents. 1 bedroom, reasonable rent, available immediately. I put down a deposit and arranged to move in at the end of the month. I closed our joint checking account and opened a new one at a different bank. The balance wasn't much. Most of our money had been going toward Rhea's lifestyle expenses anyway, but it was mine. I canceled the joint credit cards and removed myself from the apartment lease. Rhea's credit score had been carrying most of the weight anyway. She could handle the full rent on her own, assuming her Tribune salary was enough. If it wasn't, well, that wasn't my problem anymore. The beautiful thing about systematic deconstruction is that it's almost invisible until the final piece is removed, like taking apart scaffolding. You can remove 90% of the structure before anyone notices it's no longer stable. On Thursday evening, Rhea came home excited about a weekend trip to cover some lifestyle event in the mountains. "It's perfect timing," she said, packing her overnight bag. "Mark thinks this could be a feature story, maybe even cover material." Mark thinks. Everything was about what Mark thought these days. "How long will you be gone?" I asked. "Just the weekend. Back Sunday night, maybe Monday morning if the story develops." I helped her load her car, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away to spend the weekend with her editor in a mountain resort that probably had very romantic views and very comfortable beds. Then I called the moving truck. Saturday morning, Tommy Ricci and 3 other guys from the crew showed up at 7 a.m. with a truck and enough muscle to relocate my entire life in 4 hours. It didn't take long. I hadn't accumulated much stuff that felt worth keeping. Clothes, tools, a few pieces of furniture that were actually mine, some books, and a television that had been a gift from my parents. "This is it?" Tommy asked, looking around the apartment that still contained 90% of its original contents. "This is it. What about all this other stuff? Not mine." He nodded like that explained everything, which it did. Construction guys understood ownership. You took care of your tools, you were responsible for your work, and you didn't claim credit for things you hadn't built. By noon, I was moved into my new place. It was smaller, simpler, and completely mine. No abstract art that meant nothing. No uncomfortable furniture chosen for appearance over function. No evidence that I was trying to be someone I wasn't. I spent Sunday setting up my new life and making final preparations for Monday morning, when Rhea would return from her weekend getaway to discover that her supporting structure had been systematically removed. She called Sunday evening from the road. "Hey babe, I'm driving back tonight. The story was amazing. Mark thinks it could be syndicated. We might have really stumbled onto something big." "Interesting." "That's great," I said. "I'll be home late, so I'll probably just crash. But I want to tell you all about it tomorrow." Looking forward to it. I wasn't lying. I was very much looking forward to Monday's conversation. She called again at 11 p.m., panicked. Grant, what the hell happened to our apartment?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, half the furniture is gone. Your clothes are gone. What happened? Were we robbed?" "No, Rhea, we weren't robbed." "Then where is everything? Where are you?" "I'm at my new apartment." Silence. Long, heavy silence that stretched across the phone line like a crack spreading through concrete. "Your what?" "My apartment. In Millfield. I moved out yesterday." "You moved out? Without telling me?" "I'm telling you now." "Grant, what the hell is going on? This doesn't make sense. People don't just move out without discussing it first. People don't just have affairs without discussing it first either, but here we are." Another silence. This one felt different, heavier, like the moment when a building realizes its foundation has shifted and gravity is about to become a problem. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know about Mark. I know about the hotels. I know about the restaurants and the weekend trips and the 3 months of lies you've been telling me while spending my money on your new relationship." "Grant, you're being paranoid. Mark is my editor. We work together. If you're jealous of my career success..." "I'm not jealous of your career, Rhea. I'm tired of funding your affair." "That's not what this is." "Then explain the hotel charges. Explain the text messages. Explain why you told me you were staying at Brett's when you were actually at the Marriott with Mark." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "We need to talk," she finally said. We're talking now. In person. This is crazy. You can't just destroy everything because you're having some kind of paranoid breakdown." "I didn't destroy anything, Rhea. I just stopped building it." I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I opened a beer and sat in my new living room, in my own chair, in my own space, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Monday morning brought a series of increasingly frantic calls and texts that I ignored until noon. When I finally answered, Rhea was crying. "Grant, please, we need to fix this. I made mistakes, okay? I admit that. But we can work through this. 3 years doesn't just end like this." "You're right," I said. "It doesn't end like this. It ended 3 months ago when you decided Mark was more interesting than I was. This is just the paperwork." "I never meant for it to happen. It just evolved. But it doesn't have to mean anything. We can go to counseling. We can work on us." "There is no us, Rhea. There's you, and there's Mark, and there's me. And I'm done being the third wheel in my own relationship." "What about the lease? What about the apartment? I can't afford this place by myself." "That's between you and the landlord. And Mark, I suppose, since he's your partner now." "Grant, please, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we built." "I'm not throwing it away. I'm just finally admitting that I was the only one building it." I hung up and went back to work. There were foundations to be poured, structures to be engineered, real buildings that needed to be constructed by people who understood that integrity wasn't negotiable. That evening, Mark Pulaski called my personal phone. "Grant, this is Mark. I think we should talk, man to man." "About what?" "About this situation with Rhea. Look, I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. We're colleagues. We work closely together. Sometimes boundaries get blurred, but it doesn't have to destroy lives." "Whose life is destroyed?" "Well, Rhea's pretty upset. She's talking about quitting, moving away. This is affecting her work, her career. I'd hate to see her throw away her future because of a misunderstanding." "What exactly do you think I misunderstood, Mark?" "The nature of our relationship. It's professional. Mentorship. Nothing more." "Then you won't mind if she moves in with you while she figures out her housing situation." That's not appropriate. I'm her editor." "Right. Professional boundaries. I understand." "Grant, be reasonable. She needs support right now. She needs someone who understands her career, her ambitions." "She has you for that." "As a colleague, not as a... Look, what do you want here? What would it take for you to reconsider this whole thing?" What I wanted was for him to stop calling me, stop pretending this was a professional misunderstanding, and stop acting like I was the problem in a situation he'd helped create. But what I said was simpler. "I want you to take care of her, Mark. She's your responsibility now." I hung up and blocked both their numbers. 3 days later, Maggie knocked on my apartment door with a bottle of whiskey and a concerned expression. "Heard you might need some company," she said. "From who?" "Tommy mentioned you'd been quiet at work, and Rhea called the office looking for you." I let her in and poured 2 glasses of whiskey while she looked around my new place. "Nice," she said. "Simple, honest. Very you." "Thanks." "So how are you holding up?" "Better than I expected." "Any regrets?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "No. None." "Good. Because she's been telling people you had some kind of breakdown, paranoid delusions about her having an affair. Is that right?" "Yeah. Says you just snapped one day and moved out without warning. Very unstable behavior." I laughed, which surprised both of us. She's probably right about the unstable part. I was definitely unstable when I was trying to hold up a relationship by myself. Maggie raised her glass. "To stable foundations. To stable foundations." We drank, and I told her the whole story. About the rooftop bar, about the surveillance, about the systematic deconstruction of a life that had been built on lies. She listened without judgment, asked practical questions, and didn't once suggest I should have tried harder to make it work. "You know what I respect about this?" she said when I finished. "What?" "You didn't try to destroy her. You just stopped supporting her. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Oh yeah. Destruction is emotional. What you did was engineering." I liked that. Engineering. Systematic, logical, based on sound principles and reliable materials. Everything a good relationship should be, and everything mine with Rhea had never been. 2 weeks later, I heard through the construction industry grapevine that Rhea had quit the Tribune and moved to Atlanta for a new job. Mark Pulaski had apparently decided that their professional relationship was too complicated to continue, especially after his wife found out about the hotel charges on his credit card. I felt bad for his wife, who seemed to be collateral damage in someone else's poor planning. But I didn't feel bad for Rhea or Mark. They'd built something on an unstable foundation, and it had collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. That's what happens when you don't follow the engineering specifications. Eventually, gravity wins. 6 months after Rhea moved to Atlanta, I was promoted to senior estimator at Morrison & Associates. The promotion came with a corner office, a substantial raise, and responsibility for the biggest project in the company's history, a 40-story mixed-use tower that would reshape the city's skyline. I was reviewing foundation specs when Maggie knocked on my office door. "You've got visitors," she said, her expression unreadable. "Who?" "See for yourself." She stepped aside, and Rhea walked into my office like she owned the place. She looked different, thinner, more polished, wearing an expensive suit that screamed success. Behind her came a man I didn't recognize, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to check his bank balance. "Hello, Grant," Rhea said, her voice carrying the same practice casualness she'd used to explain her late nights with Mark. "Rhea, this is unexpected." "I know, I should have called first. But I was in town for business, and I thought we should talk." "About what?" She gestured to the man behind her. "This is David Richardson, my fiancé. He owns Richardson Development Group." I knew the name. Richardson Development was Morrison & Associates' biggest competitor, a company that specialized in high-end projects and premium pricing. They were also bidding against us for the 40-story tower project. "Congratulations," I said, because it seemed like the appropriate response. "Thank you." She looked around my office, taking in the awards on the wall, the project photos, the evidence of a career that had flourished after she'd left. "You've done well for yourself." "I've been busy." David Richardson stepped forward with the kind of smile that probably worked well in boardrooms. "Grant, I've heard a lot about you. Rhea speaks very highly of your technical expertise." "Does she?" "Oh, yes. In fact, that's part of why we're here. Richardson Development is always looking for talented engineers, especially ones with your experience in large-scale foundation work." I looked at Rhea, who was studying her hands like they contained fascinating secrets. "Is that right?" "We're prepared to offer you a senior position," Richardson continued. "Significant salary increase, full benefits, equity participation. You'd be working on projects that make Morrison's work look like amateur hour." "Interesting offer." "There is one small favor we'd need in return," Rhea said, finally looking up. "Information about Morrison's bid for the downtown tower project. Nothing unethical, just professional insights that could help us submit a more competitive proposal." And there it was. The real reason for the visit, the actual foundation they'd built this conversation on. They weren't here to congratulate me or offer me a better career. They were here because Rhea had remembered that I was working on the biggest project in Morrison's history, and she'd convinced her new fiancé that I might be willing to sell out my employer for the right price. "You want me to give you inside information about my company's bid?" "We want to offer you a partnership," Richardson said smoothly. "A chance to be part of something bigger than what you're doing here. And all I have to do is betray the people who trusted me enough to promote me." Rhea leaned forward, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she'd once used to convince me that her late-night work sessions were perfectly innocent. "Grant, this is business. It's not personal. Morrison will survive losing one contract. But this could change your entire life." "You're right," I said. "It could." I stood up and walked to my office window, which offered a perfect view of the construction yard where Tommy Ricci and his crew were working on the foundation for a new office building. Honest work, done by honest people, built to last. "Can I ask you something, Rhea?" "Of course." "Do you remember what you said at the rooftop bar that night? About how I couldn't build anything real?" She shifted uncomfortably. "Grant, that was a long time ago. I was drinking. I was frustrated. You were right, though. I couldn't build anything real with you. But it wasn't because I lacked vision or ambition. It was because you were never actually interested in building something together. You were just looking for someone to support you until something better came along. That's not fair. Mark wasn't better, was he? That's why you're here with David now, instead of planning a future with your former editor." Richardson's expression had shifted from confident to cautious. He was starting to understand that this conversation wasn't going according to plan. "The thing about foundations," I continued, "is that they have to be built on solid ground. You can't construct something permanent on a base that's constantly shifting, constantly looking for better options." I turned back to face them. "So here's my answer to your generous offer," No. Grant, be reasonable, Richardson said. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You're right, it is. It's my once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to choose integrity over profit, to build something real instead of something convenient. Rhea stood up, her composure finally cracking. You're making a mistake. You're letting pride get in the way of common sense. Maybe, but I'd rather make mistakes with people who respect me than succeed with people who see me as a tool to be used. Fine, she said, her voice sharp with the frustration I remembered from our worst arguments. Stay here in your little office, working on your little projects, building your little life. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you could have had. I won't, I said, because I already know what I could have had with you. I had it for 3 years, and it nearly broke me. They left without another word, Richardson's hand on Rhea's back in the same possessive gesture I'd seen Mark use months earlier. Some patterns never change. I sat back down at my desk and returned to my foundation specifications, but I couldn't concentrate. Not because I was upset about the confrontation, but because I was finally completely free of something I'd been carrying for months without realizing it. The hope that maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the relationship could have been saved. Maybe I'd given up too easily. But seeing Rhea again, watching her try to manipulate me into betraying my employer for her benefit, I understood that I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. I'd simply stopped trying to build on unstable ground. Maggie appeared in my doorway 20 minutes later. Everything okay? You look like you just solved a complex engineering problem. I did. Want to talk about it? Not really. But I'll buy you lunch if you want to hear about how my ex-girlfriend just tried to recruit me for industrial espionage. Now that, she said, sounds like a story worth hearing. We went to lunch at a place where construction workers were welcome and the coffee was strong and nobody pretended to be anything other than what they were. I told her about Rhea's visit, about the job offer, about the choice between easy money and professional integrity. You know what I like about this? Maggie said when I finished. What? 6 months ago, you would have been tempted, not because you're dishonest, but because you would have thought you owed her something, some consideration for the history you shared. And now? Now you know that history isn't the same as foundation. Just because you built something with someone doesn't mean you're obligated to keep supporting it after they've moved on. 3 weeks later, Morrison and Associates won the bid for the 40-story tower. Richardson Development's proposal was technically sound, but overpriced and under-researched. They'd clearly been counting on inside information that never materialized. I spent the next 2 years overseeing the construction of the tallest building in the city, a structure that would stand for decades and bear a small plaque crediting Morrison and Associates with the engineering work. My name wasn't on the plaque, but it was in the blueprints, in the foundation specs, in every calculation that ensured the building would support whatever was built on top of it. That felt like enough. On the day we completed the final inspection, I stood in the construction yard with Tommy Ricci and the rest of the crew, looking up at 40 stories of steel and glass and concrete that we'd built together through honest work and careful planning. Hell of a thing, Tommy said. 40 years from now, this'll still be here. 50, I corrected. Maybe 100, if we did our job right. Think we did? I looked at the building that had risen from blueprints and calculations and the sweat of people who understood that shortcuts always show up later. Yeah, I think we did. That evening, I drove past the apartment complex where Rhea and I had lived together. New tenants had moved into our old unit, and the windows glowed with warm light and the promise of people building something together on solid ground. I didn't feel sad or nostalgic or regretful. I felt like an engineer who'd finally learned the difference between supporting something and being used to hold it up, between building with someone and building for someone who was never really committed to the project. I drove home to my own apartment, my own life, my own carefully constructed future that belonged entirely to me. It was smaller than what I'd shared with Rhea, but it was built on stable ground with quality materials and honest labor, and it was mine.